I'm Kelly Ryerson. I'm Glyphosate Girl. So I've been blogging the trial, and we had a big update. I don't know if you want me to go into it now or just.
Yeah, sure. Go
Okay.
into it now, and then later on we'll go back. We'll come back to Julie and Anne. Yeah, great.
Okay, awesome. So it was actually a very sad day, as Zen knows, because I went up and we didn't know what was going to happen with the trial. We knew like these different motions had been filed by Monsanto to either have a new trial and an appeal or just to completely overturn the verdict, which is something I actually didn't know until this, that a judge can just say, actually, I don't agree with the jury at all, and I prefer this outcome, which just doesn't seem very democratic, but so it
Mhm.
is. Um, and right before we went in, Michael Baum actually came over. He's like, "Did you hear about the tentative ruling?" And I was like, "Oh, I mean, there was like a lot of commotion out there." And I was like, "No." And I was actually sitting next to one of the Monsanto attorneys. I didn't know he was Monsanto. Actually, he was just a nice guy. And I was like, "Did you hear about this tentative ruling?" And he said, "Yeah." And he handed me the paper. And I was like, "Oh, this is terrible." And he just was like mute. I think he actually felt bad. Um, and in it, it said, so it's called JNOV, so judgment notwithstanding verdict. And there were several things in there that sounded like Bolanos was just going to completely overrule everything that the jury did. Now, I was sitting among jurors, 10 jurors came, and they were so upset. And they are not emotional people. Like I can say they're nice, but they're not emotional. And one of them behind me was like, "Well, then why did we sit here all summer?" And the other's like, I can't believe this is happening. They did all this work and it was just taken away." And poor Lee Johnson is sitting up there in the front. You know, I can't imagine what he's going through and how she could make that kind of decision in front of him. Um, and so then what happened? So then everything got rolling. Bolanos comes in, and Lombardi does another beautiful job, as he does, like when he defends Philip Morris in claiming that all these faults with the trial, primarily surrounding the behavior of Brent Wisner, um, which truthfully didn't seem that bad to me, even though, like, I mean, I feel like I was trying to look and see whether
But
or
that's
not,
but that's what they do, Kelly. Right? Is they
but
attack
that is
the
what they do. So it's
person.
typical,
Yeah, but
right?
they attack the person and not the issue. And we knew that they were going to appeal because
Yes.
that's what they need to do. They have to protect their corporate profits. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so Brent was on a speakerphone in the front and trying to defend himself here and there, even though they had kind of made an agreement. I think he wasn't going to pipe in, but I think it was really hard because he was being just completely lied about by Monsanto. Mike Miller stepped in and he hadn't been to any of these trials because he'd been sick, and so but he suddenly took over for like on behalf of Johnson, and he got all these details wrong about the trial. And I mean, it was so uncomfortable, and all of us were like, this is horrible. And Bolanos was so annoyed with him that he didn't know the details. And so it was just watching everything just, it was really, really a hard day. Um, then, but
Wait, hang on a second. Can I ask a question?
yeah,
Can you give us an example of what they said was wrong with Brent Wisner's behavior? Because I was there. I saw him too in the closing statements. I'm just
well, that's
curious.
right.
What did
So
they say was so wrong with his behavior?
so what they say is so wrong is that he said during closing, as you know, this is your opportunity to change the world. That's something that I guess he shouldn't have said, because it should only be, I guess, when you're making your legal argument, it shouldn't ever be about society at large. It should only be about the plaintiff in the case. There are other things that he did, like when he said, make a change so that Monsanto, this is a big one, so that Monsanto can't celebrate. They have their champagne chilled to celebrate in that boardroom when this verdict comes out. And I guess that was inflammatory and like false. But then when you talk to the jury, they're like, of course that was like just colorful. It wasn't like we were like, oh, well, then, we should vote this way. Um, but interestingly, Bolanos was supposed to make a decision that day. And I think that Mike Miller was able to convince her to keep the door a little bit open, um, after he apologized at length for Brent Wisner's like erratic behavior or something, which isn't true, but I could see she liked that. Um, and so they each side had to write 20 pages of a condensed argument about why she should not or overturn the verdict. Um, And so then we left and we were all depressed. And then actually I got an email from a juror with a copy of a letter that they are writing to Bolanos, not just him, but several other jurors, because they're really upset about it. And it just felt, I can't even tell you what it feels like to sit there 10 feet away from the corruption that you see happening and not say anything. It was hard for me not to scream because it was so wrong. And once again, you look at Johnson, you're like, ah. So, and so now we're waiting. Any day now, she'll come out with her ruling, and I think the best we can hope for is just a new trial appeal. Of course, the devastation would be if she just overturned the whole thing.
Ugh.
That's where
So
we are.
hang on a second. Is this a thing that you can actually write to a judge? Was it just the jury that can do that, or can anybody do that?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's just the thought was, I think that the clerk wrote to them and said Bolanos is seeking opinions of the jurors. And so then they responded to her and submitted it. Because I think she must have seen they were all sitting there.
Well, she has their opinion. They sat there for 8 weeks and gave her their opinion, which was guilty on all counts.
All counts. All 16.
It's not like they suddenly changed their mind in the past few weeks. This is
No. And the other thing that's interesting is another complaint that Monsanto has is, so Dr. Naban was the person that is like a cancer physician, and he went through all the different possible causes of Johnson's cancer during the trial. And before he went into making a physical list on the wall, he said, of course, it could just be idiopathic, meaning we don't know where it came from. But if it's not, then these are the potential causes. Well, Monsanto says because he didn't write up on the whiteboard that idiopathic was one of the causes, and he only said it, therefore that really misled the jury to think that it had to be, Roundup. I mean, it's so crazy. And so actually I had talked to Dr. Nadan, who in my blog you might remember is the hot one, and he said that he truly doesn't understand this argument, because if you look at the transcript you can see how many times he said it could be we don't know what, but there's also this possibility. So I don't even know where they're really able to come with that. I have to read the submission that Baum Hedlund just put in, their 20-page argument. Oh, it's so dismissive. Corruption is so bad.
They sent it to us on Friday, right? The 20 pages that Baum Hedlund. Yeah. Didn't they send us both?
They sent us both.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought, it's sort of still the same arguments from what I read, because I skimmed like the first 10 pages and I was like, I had to go and do something else. But, I think it's going to come down to whether or not because the other thing that, I don't know if you have time for me to say this, but the other thing that Bolanos said was that she was confused that Monsanto hadn't tested the formulated product of Roundup. I mean, we spent so long in court learning that there's a difference between pure glyphosate and the formulated product with the surfactants. And she looked absolutely so confused, like this was the first she'd heard of it. And she said, well, they've tested it. The EPA knows. And Mike Miller's like, no, they haven't. She said, well, yes, they have. Well, I think after that, she must have looked, because I think she suddenly had a little question in her head. But I mean, we spent a week just on that. And I'm like, where were you? I mean, it's bizarre. I don't know if she forgot. I mean, she hasn't really been following the science that well, clearly.
Okay, so this judge is about to rule whether or not this product in its final formulation can cause cancer or contributed to Johnson's cancer, and she's not aware of the fact that the EPA does not require final formulation testing. That is absolutely unethical and unscientific and not justice at all. I was in the room when even Lombardi, Monsanto's lawyer, said the plaintiff's lawyer cannot produce one organization that wants final formulation testing. He said there's a reason for that, right? He said that, I'm sorry, it's reverberating a little bit, but he said that there's a reason for that. You can't make the animals sick and then get the results out, get the data out of them. He even admitted that it would make the animals sick if they did final formulation testing.
Right. That's exactly it. And back when Dr. Perry, the first specialist that they hired, I remember in the 90s, had...
Your sound is getting all garbled. Is there any way you can... Okay,
is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, go ahead.
Um, Back in the 90s, they had hired scientist Dr. Perry to go through the formulation. He made recommendations, and Monsanto was like, we don't like these recommendations. You're fired. They hired someone else in. The recommendations he had made was we need very specific studies on the formulation. And so Monsanto's been claiming they did those studies. It's just we haven't seen them. Then Bolanos says, we've seen them. They're around. They're cited everywhere. And all of us are like, where? Where did she see those studies? I mean, the jurors didn't see the studies. There are no studies. Like there's one out of like the 4 that he recommended. So she just had missed that part. But you know what? Lombardi has paved over it very, very well so that it doesn't sound like an issue in her ear. Like they're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, well, she's clearly been listening to what they're saying, but not to what Brent Wisner was saying.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, because so many people for so long have been hearing, we have hundreds of studies showing the safety of glyphosate, and so that's sort of like ingrained in people's.
Yeah, it's like 800 studies show. I'm like, well, no, we don't see them. You're making these up.
Yeah, and some of the studies that we have seen, I'm just going to mute you for a second because I'm getting it. But some of the studies that we have seen, for instance, I did a Freedom of Information Act after we went to the EPA because we found glyphosate in breast milk. And they said to me, we have hundreds of studies showing that glyphosate is safe. That's why we approved it. And I'm like, I haven't seen those studies. Where are those studies? So I went home and did a Freedom of Information Act. And 6 months later, I get, I think it was 20 and then maybe 40. I had to keep asking them for more tests, for more results, because they don't just give you everything all at once. I guess they just make you really work for it. So I think in the end, I might have gotten 40 or studies or so. And they showed things like, for instance, okay, so what they do is they look at things regarding toxicology, right? And the toxicology means more than 50% of the animals die. Toxic, something that is toxic is deemed toxic if more than 50% of the animals die within that 96 hours, right? From a certain level of exposure. And so one of the studies showed that within 4 days, and I quote, within 4 days, most of the oysters were closed and not feeding. So this was considered showing safety because the oysters didn't die. They were just closed and not feeding. So, but what happened on the 5th day or the 6th day? So this is an example of one of the hundreds of studies that show that glyphosate is not toxic. For example, another one is 5.2 parts per million of the white shrimp above that level, and then the white shrimp died within 4 days, right? But it wasn't 50% of them all at once. So, they were like, well, it's not toxic. So, and what's the size of a 6-week-old fetus? It's the size of a shrimp, right? And how long does glyphosate stay viable in dark, salty water? 315 days. What's in our womb? Dark, salty water, right? So these connections are not being made by the EPA because they just look at the one ingredient. They just look at toxicology. They just look at short term. They're so limited in their scope that it becomes actually unscientific, and it's not accurate. And then we have Supreme Court judges sitting on the bench here, making a decision about a product when they don't even understand the basic science and the basic policy. This is absolutely an atrocity. And if she overturns that ruling, this is, I can't even imagine, like people are calling for in the chat over here. We have to do something big. I really do wish that she could hear from the thousands of people that have signed, it's probably over 1 million now, people that have signed petitions to ban glyphosate and to take action. So does anybody have any other questions for Kelly?
Just thank you for doing all the research, because
You're welcome.
And just getting this first-hand account is just such amazing information. So thank you.
I'm so glad. I'm so happy to do it.
Even though I'm crying right now.
I know. I was in a bad state. Zen said, "Hey, do you want to do a Facebook Live?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." It's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you were able to meet the jury members.
Me too.
Of course, once this is done, we would like to follow up. If you got any of their information, we'd like to follow up and interview some of them because
sure.
They really did a service to humanity. And if she overturns their verdict, I don't understand why we even have a jury system.
No, I don't either. There's no point. I was saying this is like North Korea, and they're like, it's not quite that bad. I'm like, but it's like a fake jury then.
Well, they're just changing the laws because jury trial is supposed to judge the law before they judge the person. So they've
Yeah.
thrown the law out so that you can't judge the person.
Yeah.
Crazy. It is absolutely absurd. I've never heard of a judge overruling a jury.
No.
I'm so depressed.
What happened to is Brent and his firm? What are they saying about this? Have you heard their response?
Yeah. So they were feeling really bad right after the tentative ruling, right going into the hearing, and Brent wasn't there. He, I think because there had been several files that had been made by Monsanto about articles of him in press where he's saying, it's so exciting, this is the beginning of like a new era and that kind of thing. And she said, and she submitted it to, Volnos submitted it to the court because she said we should talk about like these emotions or whatever, and if they're appropriate.
Yes.
And so he didn't show up. He didn't show up to the trial because it was clear that it was going to be like, I don't know, controversial. And when he would pipe in on the speakerphone, she would just be rolling her eyes and so pissed that he's even calling in. And I'm like, poor Brent, my gosh, he just did this amazing service to humanity.
Robert Kennedy, he's part of the same thing. Did he have a comment to make?
He didn't have a comment. He wasn't there. He and Brent were missing. Everyone else was there, and David Dickens was there, but because Mike Miller is his boss, Mike Miller did the talking, but I was kind of like, oh, maybe you should have David Dickens because he was there for the trial.
So in California, do you have something called a slap suit where they don't allow you to talk against an organization that might cause them financial harm? In Florida, we have a slap suit that drags our people through hell, millions of dollars.
Oh, really? No, I don't know.
It's called SLAAP, and if you need more information, you need to look into that because that's what it sounds like because they're attacking what he said, not the facts that were presented.
I see. That's good to know. I'm going to look at that. Michael Baum was feeling bummed, but then he felt reinvigorated after he went back and like collected because the evidence is still there. So as far as what they have control over, they know the evidence is still there. So ultimately, I think he probably thinks, I mean, I shouldn't misquote him, but I think the sentiment there of all the attorneys is that this will probably end up in appeal. So
Yeah.
they bring all of the evidence.
Again, that whole character thing is an overlay of the slap suit, and it has nothing to do with the facts and the trial at all, but they're confusing the issue right now. That's the way I see it.
Well,
Yeah,
and that's how Monsanto works. They love to confuse the issue, and they love to attack the character of somebody rather than the actual.
And they don't want you to know what the law is. And so when you don't know the law, they'll just keep dragging you. We've got one of our commissioners a $4 million suit right now, but she's winning it. But it's been one appeal after another because it was just a slap suit.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's good to know.
And let's remind all the listeners or people who are watching too that there are 8,700 lawsuits against Monsanto, and this verdict does not mean that those lawsuits will go away. Those lawsuits are still coming forward, and there's one coming up. Is it December or January in St. Louis, in which they will be able.
I thought it was this month.
Is it this month?
Yeah.
No, it was postponed.
It was postponed. It was supposed to be this month.
2019. Yeah.
To January, right?
Yeah. Actually, it may now be the beginning of February because it's going to be exactly at the same time as the federal trial in San Francisco. Okay. So they're going to be two going at the same time, which is great. More
right.
merrier.
So this other lawsuit that's happening in St. Louis means that the plaintiffs can subpoena people like Donna Farmer, who lives in that state, and that she will have to come to the stand. So. And the other thing is that the lawyers from Baum, Headlam, Aresti, and Goldman said that they only got to present about 20% of the documents that were in the discovery, they found in the discovery process, showing the collusion between the EPA and Monsanto. So there's a lot more information to be revealed, and we are excited for them to be able to reveal that information. And perhaps, do you know that if this is appealed, can they bring up more information, or will they only be able to reassess the same information?
I think they're only able to reassess the same information that was shown in the first trial because it's supposed to be a reevaluation of that trial.
Okay.
But so Brent is one of the attorneys that is going to be on the federal trial in February. And I think at that point, he's going to be able to bring in a lot more evidence because he's with this one from the beginning, unlike this first trial that was Mike Miller until his injury. So Brent has tons of stuff he said he's ready to show. So hopefully it gets passed and he can show it.